Hello, my name is Antonio. Going to be going over the entire history of the Earth, human civilization, from 4000 BC to current day. This is mainly for my purposes, so I can go over it again and again and again. I realized that human nature was basically we started communicating by telling each other stories. That's how memory began. That's how we could, that's how history was passed down from generation to generation. And it turns out that we actually learn faster and retain the information for a longer period of time when we hear it. So when you're reading, it increases. When you read from the paper, it does increase brain synapses, and your brain does become faster, but the information can dwindle away. While if you hear something, it actually is proven to stay in the brain for a longer amount of time. So I'm just going to go over the history of the Earth, mainly for me, for my own study, and hope you enjoy it if you're going to actually be taking a part of this as well. So here we go. The first is the ancient and classical periods, 3500 BC to 500 CE, a global and comparative dimensions. Origins of civilization, 4000 to 2000 BC. In a few areas, Neolithic settlements grew in size and complexity, acquiring social organization commonly called civilization. This life is characterized by one, large concentrations of people, usually cities and central areas, even though the majority of settlements remain rural. Two, hierarchical social and political structures, usually with states and priesthoods. 3, economic specializations and organized societal divisions, of labor. And 4, formal methods of permanent record keeping using some form of writing. Moving on, emergence of first civilizations. The first known civilizations developed in 3 river valley systems in Eurasia: Euphrates Valley of Mesopotamia, 2, the Nile Valley of Egypt, and 3, the Indus Valley of India. Changing environmental conditions for civilized societies. Each society experienced a long tradition during which techniques of maintaining large-scale societies were developed. Remains of temples and palaces reflect the emergence of priestly and political managerial classes. These societies utilized technologies of irrigation to manage water resources, and skills in metallurgy made new materials like bronze available. The earliest civilization was in the region of Sumer in southern Mesopotamia by 3000 BC. The first cities controlled relatively large areas and built great temple structures called ziggurats. In Egypt, the proto-dynastic unification of northern and southern regions occurred by about 3000 BC. In the Indus Valley, civilizations began somewhere later. But by 2500 BC, the 2 great cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were well established. Now I'm going to stop right there and give a few hints for some people who are seeking refuge from, schools and everything, because we all know schools are the de-education centrals of this country. I mean, they've become just stagnant ponds where people go to mainly just have social interactions rather than education. Despite whatever you hear, what mainstream media tells you, what mainstream media forces you to pay attention to, we all want to learn. Learning is fun. I mean, education is very, very interesting. I mean, people want to read books, but they can't. It's kind of painful. I mean, you look at a book and you get apprehensive because it's like so much information you can learn, but Jesus Christ, that's a big book. I don't want to read it. So right now, a hint to help you learn even faster is, while I'm going through this, you just go on to certain websites and research these names. Say you don't get a name like proto-dynastic, you research Wikipedia, go to Wikipedia, Wiki, WIKIPEDIA dot, is that org or .com? Just try one of those. You'll get it. It's one of the biggest websites on the planet, in America right now. So you would search proto and then dynastic, and you'll put it together. You'll eventually figure it out. But that's just for this, for people who are kind of slow to this, just joining us. And all right. Moving on, hopefully I'll remember something else that's maybe helpful for you. So wikipedia.org, I believe. Another website that you can check out would be Wiktionary. It's like a dictionary, Wiktionary. And that'll help you with words that you don't understand. Moving on. Later primary civilizations. In other regions, civilized societies developed independently, but later than the early river valley civilizations. The origins of Chinese civilization are in the agricultural societies in northern Chinese Yellow River Valley. The low S soil of the region provided a fertile basis for agriculture using labor-intensive methods of garden cultivation. Irrigation was not a major element, but flood control was a significant activity. Civilized life developed out of expanding Neolithic villages around 2500 to 2000 BC. Chinese tradition describes this time as an era of rule by 5 heavenly emperors who were succeeded by the human rulers of the Xia dynasty. That was 2357 to 2256 BC. Now, scholars assume that some formal state existed by 2000 BC, but little direct evidence of the Xia exists. The Shang dynasty, which controlled northern China by the 1500s BC, is the first for which clear archaeological evidence exists. Its capital, Anyang, was a major city by 1300 BC. Mesoamerican civilizations. In the areas of modern Mexico and Guatemala, and Andean civilizations in southern America, started in complex agricultural communities that developed possibly as early as 2500 BC. Distinctive crops, especially corn, and in the Andes, potatoes, along with the absence of major domesticated draft animals, made the emerging civilizations quite different in character from those in the Eastern Hemisphere. The Olmecs created the first major Mesoamerican urban society by 1200 BC, with large stone structures and statues and ceremonial centers with some urban functions. Olmec civilization disappears from the historical record by 400 BC, but its heritage may have influenced the Maya civilization, which flourished from 200 to 800 AD, followed by a long decline. You should see Teotihuacan, moving on. In the Andes region in Peru, the Chavan developed a powerful urban-based state by 1000 BC, which flourished until 200 AD. This was followed by divisions of the region into smaller states that were not brought together again until the end of the Inca Empire in the 15th century AD. Moving on. Early complex non-urban societies. The development of agricultural productivity and complexity did not inevitably lead to the emergence of civilizations in many areas. Complex, hierarchically organized societies developed that did not create cities or develop formal writing systems. They are not formally identifiable as civilizations, but are more developed in the simple Neolithic agricultural settlements in Southeast Asia, in the Korat Plateau region of modern Thailand. Archaeological evidence from Ban Chiang and Nan Nak Ta shows that by 2000 BC, villagers were producing sophisticated ceramics and cast bronze tools, as well as developing techniques of rice paddy cultivation, which may have influenced the later evolution of agriculture in Chinese civilizations. In continental North America, large mound builder societies began by 1500 BC in the lower Mississippi Valley. You should see North American chiefdoms for that. The Great Ceremonial Center and cluster of villages in Poverty Point in Louisiana may have contained more than 5,000 inhabitants by 1000 BC. Comparisons. Civilized societies show many similarities and differences. Civilizations in river valleys. Origins of civilizations were frequently identified with river valleys in early modern historical scholarship. Some scholars felt that irrigation was the necessary catalyst for creating a hierarchical society of dominant managers. While this may have been true for the cases of the three earliest civilizations, further study of early Chinese civilization shows that irrigation-based agriculture did not play a major role in developing hierarchical institutions, and the absence of major river valleys in Mesoamerica and the region of the Andes civilization brought an end to the old river valley theory of origins of civilization. The cities took different forms in ancient societies, but were distinguished from the agricultural villages. Cities were generally significantly larger and contained a cosmopolitan population consisting of more than a cluster of kinship-defined clans. The city had a clearly defined nucleus of settlement, often marked with a wall that separated it from its related agricultural hinterland. It had institutions that are identified with the city as a unit, and these municipal institutions in ancient cities included temples and grand monuments, palaces, markets, and the defense structures like walls. Cities in Sumer and the Indus Valley most completely fit this definition, while the large population centers in ancient Egypt were more palace temple complexes and had structures that were less clearly municipal. In China, there is no evidence of true cities until the Shang dynasty, around 2357 to 2256 BC. But the Shang capital, Anyang, was a major city of the ancient world. In early Mesoamerican and Andean civilizations, the major population centers were similar to those in Egypt, being more ceremonial centers of power than true urban areas. At the extreme, clusters of villages around ceremonial monuments distinguished the early mound builder civilizations and showed their character as complex non-urban societies. Agriculture provided another area of diversity among the early civilizations, with each being associated with a distinctive cluster of products and methods. Sumer, Egypt, and the Indus Valley society were similar in terms of the basic crops grown, which were standard grains like wheat and barley, and the field method of cultivation using plows. Irrigation in Sumer and the Indus Valley required utilization of canals and levees to control and distribute river waters that could otherwise cause significant damage. In Egypt, basin irrigation simply channeled water into fields because Nile floods were less violent and in cycle with the growing season. In China, the primary early crop was millet, with rice being introduced later. The basic method for garden cultivation did not include the use of a plow or draft animals, and gave a distinctive tone to Chinese society. In the Western Hemisphere, the lack of available draft animals and cattle for domestication gave increased importance to distinctive crops like corn and potatoes. In Mesoamerica, water control involved creating fields from swamps by building raised plots or chiampas, and in the large areas, older methods of slash and burn agriculture were continued. Growth of civilizations, 2000 to 300 BC. Periodization of world history after the formative period of agricultural civilization focuses mainly on the integration of larger regional units, based in turn on commercial, cultural, and political interactions. The stages of integration in the Eastern Hemisphere mark the main periods of ancient history from 2000 BC onward, culminating in the great classical empires. Subsidiary themes of periodization involve the main civilizations spreading influence and the major centers making commercial and cultural contacts from China to the Mediterranean. The creation of regional unified societies. The civilizations of the Eastern Hemisphere with their surrounding societies through trade, conquest, and migrations of peoples. Civilizations grew from smaller temple or city-states into regional empires. Egypt, from 3100 to 2686 BC, was unified by 3100 BC. By the conquests of Narmer, and the state remained concentrated in the Nile Valley during the Old Kingdom to 2200 BC, and Middle Kingdom 2100 to 1800 BC, in the New Kingdom 1570 to 1050 BC. However, Egyptian rulers expanded into Southwest Asia as well as further south into East Africa. In Mesopotamia around 2350 BC, Sargon I of Akkad conquered the city-states of the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, creating a unified regional empire. 2371 to 2190, his empire was short-lived, but others followed, maintaining broader regional unity under increasingly large empires. In the Indus Valley, South Asia to 72 BC. The political structure is not clear from the surviving evidence, but the similarities of the great cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro indicate significant cultural uniformity, if not political unity. However, this regional society declined and collapsed as a result of natural changes and disasters and nomadic invasions in 1600 to 1200 BC. The regional civilization was placed by a society dominated by Aryan herding peoples. They established a society with regional cultural unity under temples and a priestly Brahmin class by 800 BC, but did not achieve political unity. Shang rulers established a regional empire in northern China, 1800 to 1122 BC, and expansion into southern China continued under the early Western Zhou dynasty, 1122 to 770 BC. Trade and movement of peoples also expanded the civilized lifestyles into new areas. The Minoan civilization, from 3000 to 2200 BC, emerged on the island of Crete by 3000 BC as a result of contacts with Egypt and Mesopotamia. Its capital, Kousos, became the capital of a sea-based trade empire which brought civilizations to the mainland of Greece and elsewhere in the Mediterranean. Civilizations and non-urban societies. Commercial and military contacts with surrounding peoples resulted in the formation of distinctive societies. Barbarians often successfully invaded civilized states, and this interaction was part of the expansion of civilizations into new regions. 1700 to 1300 BC. War chariot invasions. The development of the two-wheeled war chariot among barbarians around 1700 BC resulted in conquests of major civilized societies. Hyksos charioteers conquered Egypt 1786 to 1552 and ruled it from 1730 to 1570 BC. Kassite charioteers invaders successfully invaded Mesopotamia around 1700 BC and formed the first of a series of charioteer empires there. In China, the Shang dynasty used war chariots to established control. The Aryan invaders of India were also charioteers. The end of the Minoan civilization around 1400 BC opened the way for the chariot warriors of Mycenae and the Greek mainland to emerge as the dominant force in that region. 1000 BC. New migrations and conquests. Charioteer dominance was broken by new peoples with new technologies in many areas. In the Middle East, often in association with the development of iron tools and weapons, new people conquered much of the region. Hittites in Anatolia and groups like the Philistines in the eastern Mediterranean coastal areas established powerful states, while old centers of civilizations in Egypt and Mesopotamia experienced repeated invasions. The climax came with the establishment by 665 BC of the new Assyrian Empire. Many of these groups were Indo-European, coming from Central Eurasia and migrating into Europe and South Asia, as well as the Middle East. These included Aryans in India and the Dorians in Greece. The Zhou conquerors of China in the 11th century BC came from Central Asia and may have been forced out by Indo-European migrations. The Axial Period. Increasing interregional trade, development of political institutions capable of ruling large areas, and emergence of new world views transformed the ancient civilized societies of the Eastern Hemisphere. The result was the existence by 300 BC of distinctive regional civilizations in China, South Asia, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean basin. The transformation of ancient societies was accompanied by important redefinitions of world views in the civilized regions. Thinkers created the axis around which philosophical and religious thought revolved for the next 2,000 years. Ethical monotheism in the Middle East was developed especially by Zarathustra or Zoroaster in eastern Persia, probably about 600 BC, but possibly earlier. Zoroastrian, you should see, economy, technology, society, and culture, spread in the Persian Empire starting in the 6th century BC. Ethical monotheism also arose among the Hebrew prophets in Palestine around 1020 to 1000 BC, starting in the 8th century BC and spreading as Jewish people migrated in later classical periods. Hindu traditions of belief and social organization developed in the emerging Aryan society of India, with the early sacred hymns, or Vedas, and the Brahmin priesthood providing the foundations by 700 to 500 BC. The composition in the 8th to the 4th centuries BC of the Upanishads, 800 to 550 BC, provided systematic interpretations of the Vedas and are the foundation for much of the later Indian philosophical thought. Buddhism, 550 to 321, developed in India in these same centuries, beginning with the teaching career of Gautama Siddhartha, the Buddha, 542 to 483 BC, as a rejection of the Brahmin dominance of the caste system. The development of Hinduism and Buddhism created the distinctive worldviews of Indian civilization by the end of the Axial period. Confucianism Confucius lived during the 6th century BC in China, in the time of great political instability as the Zhou dynasties disintegrated. His teachings provided the philosophical base for social loyalty and obedience. At this same time, worldview alternatives were defined. Among them were Taoism, which is usually traced to the legendary teacher Lao Tzu, who lived around 600 BC, the egalitarian teachings of Mozi, 471 to 391 BC, and the authoritarian legalism, mostly fully articulated by the later Han Fei of 233 BC. Greek philosophy represents the intellectual culmination of the transformations in the Eastern Mediterranean societies by the Mycenaeans and Dorians. Socrates, 469 to 399 BC, Plato, 427 to 327 BC, and Aristotle, 384 to 322 BC, provided the basis for the main traditions of Greek philosophy emerging from the Axial Age. I had no idea Plato lived to be 100 years old. Anyway, classical civilizations, 300 BC to 500 CE. The ecumene, a continuous belt of urban societies and networks of trade and ideas, emerged in the Eastern Hemisphere. Important features of this ecumene were the great empires, which provided large, secure areas for trade and wealth and power necessary for basic economic development and political stability. By 300 BC to 500 CE, great classical empires, regional civilizations in the Eastern Hemisphere, were politically unified by major imperial systems in the classical area. Commercial and technological developments had made such large political systems feasible, while shared cultures both facilitated and benefited from the empires. These empires provided a foundation in most regions for a sense of civilization identity. The Middle East. The Middle East was the first region to be brought under the control of a single empire, and a long imperial tradition of regional control was established. By 935 to 612 BC, Assyrian Empire gained control of both Mesopotamia and Egypt by 665 BC. 550 to 330 BC, the Persian Empire, established by Cyrus the Great, 556 to 530 BC, re-established full regional control after the end of the Assyrian Empire. The empire was defeated by Alexander the Great, 356 to 323 BC, whose conquest laid the foundations for a number of imperial states in Greece, the Middle East, and Central Asia. 330 to 30 BC, Alexander's successor states, the Seleucid successors to Alexander's generals, controlled most of the Middle East, except for Egypt, from 305 to 64 BC. Egypt was ruled by descendants of Alexander's generals Ptolemy, 367 to 283 BC, until the Roman victory in 30 BC. 312 BC to 651 AD, the Persian Empire. So from 312 BC to 226 AD, the Parthian Empire was established in the eastern regions of the Middle East after the death of Alexander the Great. It expanded until it controlled most of the region except for Egypt and the Mediterranean coastal societies, which by the end of the 1st century BC had come under Roman control. 226 to 651 AD, Sassanid Empire replaced the declining Parthian state and re-established effective regional control until falling to the Muslim conquest in the 7th century. The Mediterranean Basin. Imperial unification of the Mediterranean Basin came gradually and was associated with a single imperial system. The Roman Empire began as a republican city-state in Italy around 500 BC. By the end of the 2nd century BC, it had gained control of all of Italy, Greece, and the Iberian Peninsula. By the 1st century CE, it controlled all of the Mediterranean Basin and much of Western Europe. This unity lasted until the fall of Rome to nomadic invaders in the 5th century. Although this invasion has been preceded by a long period of loss of control in many areas and a formal division of the empire into eastern and western sections, the tradition of Roman unity provided a strong sense of identity to Western civilization, but also contributed to ideas of empire in Eastern Europe. Chinese imperial unity. In 221 BC, Shi Huangdi of the Qin dynasty conquered all of the rival states that had emerged in the later Zhou Empire. Qin control did not survive Shi Huangdi's death, but imperial unification was re-established by 202 BC by the Han dynasty. By the time Han Empire disintegrated in the 3rd century AD, a clear sense of Chinese unity had been established, and it survived nearly 4 centuries of division until the reunification of China under the Sui dynasty in 589 AD. Indian empires. Hinduism provided a strong basis for the social order in India that was less identified with imperial political structures than in the other regional civilizations. Temple organization and the caste system were effective alternatives to the control of kings. However, India did experience major imperial unifications. 322 to 184 BC, the Mauryan Empire, the defeat of local states by Alexander in 327 to 324 BC opened the way for unification of northern India by imperial conquest. 322 to 298 BC, Chandragupta Maurya conquered much of northern India, creating the basis for the Mauryan Empire. From 268 to 232 BC, the reign of Ashoka, Chandragupta's grandson, represented the high point of Mauryan power in a time of official support for Buddhism. After Ashoka's death, the dynastic rivalries, civil unrest, and a revival of Hinduism led to 5 centuries of political disunity. 78 to 180 AD, Kushan Empire was the strongest state in the era of instability. Based in Central Asia and modern Afghanistan, it controlled northern India under Kanishka, who aided the expansion of Buddhism in Central Asia. From 320 to 535 AD, the Gupta Empire revived Indian imperial unity. Gupta rulers gave support to Brahmins and Hinduism. The empire disintegrated in the face of invasions from Central Asia, especially 500 to 535 AD. The expansion of the ecumene. The zone of urban societies, trade networks, and large states expanded beyond the core regions of the major civilizations in the classical era. Some of this was the result of imperial conquest, but more was a result of expanding trade networks and the growing communities based on the great religions of the axial era. Africa. 1000 to 591 BC, Kush. New Kingdom Egyptian expansion south in the Nile Valley created the Nubian state of Kush. Kush became independent around 950 BC and then conquered Egypt, where Kushites ruled as the 25th dynasty. After the Assyrian conquest of Egypt, the Kushite Empire continued in Nubia, developing a distinctive culture and urban society with its capital in Napata. From 591 BC to 350 AD, the Meroe, the successor to Napata, was the center of a state which engaged actively in trade with the Mediterranean world and was a major producer of iron implements in the developing trade in Africa. Kingdom of Aksum, developed in the Ethiopian highlands, trade with India and Mediterranean areas, and Greek and Arabian cultural influences created a prosperous state with conquered Meroe. The conversion of the king to Christianity around 350 AD laid the basis for the long-lasting Ethiopian Christian culture. Central Eurasia. Central Eurasia witnessed the development of strong herding societies all along the northern region of the Ecumene. The migrations of these people and their invasions of the urban societies are a major theme in the Western classical civilizations. 5th century BC, 5th century AD. Xiongnu and Huns developed a strong herding society in the Central Asian borderlands of China. Ma Dun ruled from 209 to 174 BC, created a large federation which threatened the Han Dynasty and opened Central Eurasia to increasing commercial and military interactions. The confederation disintegrated by the 1st century AD. By the Han, descendants of the Xiongnu affected all the civilizations of the Ecumene. In the 5th century AD, they gained control of much of Eastern Europe under the leadership of Attila the Hun, and Hun invaders were a major cause of the collapse of the Gupta Empire in India. The Silk Roads. The movement of herding peoples were part of the creation of a whole belt of society stretching from northern China to Central Europe, through which peoples, goods, and ideas could move. Because silk was an important product in these Because silk was an important product in these trade networks, the whole system of economic interchanges had become known as the Silk Roads. The stability provided by the great empires and growing demand for goods helped to create an economic network in which textiles, precious stones, glass, horses, and other products passed from one side of the Eastern Hemisphere to the other on a regular basis. The spread of religions, 300 BC to 500 AD. Many of the worldviews that emerged during the axial period spread across the boundaries of civilizations, creating new communities with shared ideals. These new style communities combined urban and herding societies and spread throughout the Eastern Hemisphere, providing new basis for interregional interrelations. The spread of Hellenism. Hellenism spread outward from the Greek city-states, received a major impetus from the conquest of Alexander the Great, late in the 4th century BC. From the Mediterranean basin to northern India, Alexander's forces aided the spread of Hellenistic ideas, urban structures, and political concepts. For 3 centuries, the successor states of Alexander's empire developed Hellenistic institutions and ideas in the Middle East, making them an important part of the general cultural framework of that region. In northern India and Central Asia, Greek themes blended with local traditions, creating distinctive cultural syntheses. This blend, which was reflected in art and sculpture, reached a high point in the Buddhist sculpture of Gandhara in the 1st century AD. Hellenistic art influence has been traced as far east as China. 509 to 444 BC, the Roman Republic emerged as the dominant force in the Mediterranean basin. Roman culture was strongly influenced by Hellenism, especially after the Roman conquest of Greece in the 2nd century BC. In general terms, the Roman Empire was a distinctive but clearly Hellenistic society by the 1st century BC. Hellenism provided at least some important artistic and cultural themes for societies all across the Eastern Hemisphere. Moving on to Buddhism. Buddhism spread both north and south from India. Official support for the Mauryan ruler Ashoka in the 3rd century BC and the active sending of missionaries encouraged the spread of Buddhism. Theravada Buddhism was the early Buddhist form, and it spread to southern India, Sri Lanka, and ultimately to the mainland territories and islands of Southeast Asia. In the 1st century AD, Mahayana Buddhism developed as a distinctive form of the faith in Central Eurasia and later China. Buddhist mercenaries and merchants and teachers interacted with Greeks and Persians in Central Asia and the Middle East. and Buddhism spread through the diaspora communities of merchants in many regions along the Silk Roads. It was brought to China by the 1st century AD, gradually winning converts and becoming very powerful following the collapse of the Han Dynasty. By 500 AD, Buddhism was an important force throughout more than half of the Eastern Hemisphere. Alright, that's going to be it for today. I'm going to go and rest my jaws here. I think I lost weight doing this. But I hope you guys enjoy it. Stick around. We're going to be going through the entire history of human civilization. This is going to be fun for me as well. So feel free to copy this and add pictures onto it and put it on YouTube or something if you want. But that'll take too much time for me. Thank you again. My name's Antonio. Take care.